Hey everyone, welcome back to the Everyday Five podcast. I'm your host, Megan Combs, and today on the show, I'll be chatting with Erin about her financial independence journey. So, this is an awesome episode. We dive into how life can be full of happy accidents, how burnout can be so bad that quitting without a plan is sometimes your only option. We also talk about how representation matters not just in the corporate world, but also in your community, and how to live frugally when you have 3 kids. So tune in to hear Erin's story and potentially pick up tidbits that will help you build your own FI life. Hey, Erin, welcome. Why don't you introduce yourself?
Hi, my name is Erin G. I live in Colorado Springs, Colorado. I'm a native Coloradan, and I have a husband of almost 20 years now, and we have 3 boys who are 8, 5, and 3, and they keep us very busy. And I actually worked for the better part of 2 decades doing missile defense. So I got to work on radars and rockets and communication systems and stuff like that. And after COVID, they were talking about having everybody come back into the office full time. And I kind of said, you know what, I don't think I want to do that anymore. And so in January of 22, I quit my job and I'm just exploring the FI life now.
That sounds really incredible. And congratulations for quitting your job. Yay. Awesome. So how did you find financial independence? What drew you to it at first?
I kind of like to say that we were on the FI path before it became a thing. So I started working in the early 2000s, and at the time, there really wasn't a lot in the way of personal finance education available. I spent when I started getting interested in personal finance and trying to do better with my money in my early 20s, I spent a lot of time at the library picking up books like Dave Ramsey and Susie Orman and whatever else happened to be on the shelves. Millionaire Next Door was one of those books and a few other things like that. But there really wasn't much out there. And so when blogs like Get Rich Slowly and The Simple Dollar came along, I read a lot of those. I actually had a Roth IRA that my mother made me open in the summer of 1998 when I got my first full-time job. And I didn't know what it was. Like, she just pretty much told me, you're going to put some money from your summer job in this account. And then I forgot about it until my mid-20s, at which time it had tripled in value. And so that kind of got me interested in saving more and being smarter with my money. And so my husband and I kind of were on a parallel path, both of us saving a little bit and spending what was left. And then when other blogs and podcasts and things started coming along, I was already kind of interested in the topic. And so I was able to jump in and learn a lot more and figure it out. There was this whole financial independence path. And my husband and I kind of struggled to figure out what the next goals were after we had done the things that you're supposed to do as a 20-something. And so financial independence kind of became the goal when we were in our late 20s, early 30s. And we were already significantly along the path because we'd just kind of been natural savers for the better part of a decade at that point.
And would you say you were natural savers because that's kind of how your parents were? Or like, why did you naturally want to save more? What brought that about in your personalities?
I think part of it was that, the spend less than you earn was drilled into both my husband's and my heads early on in life. Both of our families tended to be fairly frugal. We always lived off of just my dad's income. My mom was a stay-at-home mom for 16 years. And so there wasn't always, a ton of extra. And so we kind of just were on that path already. And then, we got to a point where both my husband and I owned homes separately when we were dating. And, it's a lot of expense to carry a house by yourself. When you're in your early 20s. And so I kind of was at the point where I just needed to be smarter with my money to make sure that there was enough at the end of the month. with paying my mortgage and paying home repairs and things like that I kind of wasn't expecting. My parents had definitely encouraged me to buy a house if I was going to be in one place longer than, 3 to 5 years was kind of the rule of thumb. And so I spent a lot more on that house than, I necessarily would have if I was renting. And so that required me to be a little bit smarter and nail down my budget a little bit better than I had been when I was renting. So I think that was a significant driver for me. The paycheck didn't stretch very far when I was a little newbie engineer.
Yeah, I totally get that. You bought a house when you were in your 20s because your parents kind of gave you the advice that if you're going to stay somewhere 3 to 5 years, you should own a home. What do you now think of that decision now that you're older and kind of have some experience under your belt about owning property?
So it's funny because that house accidentally ended up being a really smart decision. I think at the time, I don't know that I was necessarily ready for it. I really enjoyed the space. I really enjoyed being a homeowner. I had a lot of pride of ownership, and it was a nice gathering place for my friends since I was the only person who owned my own place in my early 20s. So I really enjoyed that part of it. But the timeline was funny. So I bought that house in 2006. And I bought it on a 3-year ARM, which means that the rate was going to adjust for the first time in 2009. So if we do the math, the world started going to heck in a handbasket about the time that my rate adjusted for the very first time. And it went down. And the next year, when it adjusted again, it went down again. And it continued to do that for several years until it bottomed out at 3%. And it stayed there for quite a number of years. And I kind of said, in the interim, I moved to Boston for a little while. I moved in with my now husband. We started renting that house out, and we kind of always said, well, we'll sell that house when the interest rate gets back up to where it was when I bought the house. And I think that was about 6.5, 6.25, something like that when I had bought the property. And it just didn't get there for the next 10 years. It just stayed in the basement as far as rates go. And so we were making decent money on it. And we were living in the place that my husband had bought when he was single, and we were renting mine out. And it worked out really well for us. And we eventually got to a point in 2018 where we decided that we no longer wanted to own that property, and we were able to actually do a 1031 exchange and sell that property and buy 2 townhomes for essentially the same amount of money. And so we now have those 2 townhomes as rentals. So in a very strange, random way that was not at all intentional, it ended up being kind of the seed for a small rental portfolio. The house that my husband bought when he was single is also a rental at this point, because when we had kids, that house was no longer going to work for us. And so we bought a bigger place and we rented out the old place. And so now we have the 2 townhouses and the single family home, and then, our primary residence. So it worked out well. I wouldn't say that any of it was explicitly intentional. I was just kind of trying to make the right financial move at each inflection point along the path of our lives. But it's worked out well for us. And I don't mind having the rentals. We do have a property management company because I learned very early on that I am a terrible property manager. That was something I had to learn about myself. But we do pretty well, and we manage the manager, and life moves forward. So we've really kind of enjoyed where we've gotten to. I don't think we'll be adding any more rentals to our portfolio, but we're pretty happy with where we're at right now.
Yeah, it sounds like the decision kind of worked out in your favor, which is funny because sometimes when you make decisions like that when you're younger, they can go the opposite way, right? So it's great that it worked out for you guys. And would you mind, just for the audience members who might not know what a 1031 exchange is, would you mind explaining what that is?
Yeah, absolutely. So a 1031 exchange is essentially when you exchange one asset for a similar asset. And so you don't end up paying capital gains tax on that amount because you're essentially just rolling it over into something that's the same. And usually it's done with like rental properties, investment properties. So the idea was that rather than take the capital gains that we would have had out of that house, because I'd owned it for, at that point, a dozen years, the entirety of what we sold that property for, minus whatever mortgage we had to pay back on it, was essentially money that was not taxed because we immediately went out and purchased property with that money. Now you do have to jump through some hoops to do a 1031 exchange. It's not something to undertake lightly. There are some restrictive timeframes, and you have to use an outside manager for the money. You can't take possession of the money, or it negates the whole thing. So there's some little foibles to it, but there are certainly communities and experts out there. You know, I actually used Bigger Pockets pretty significantly when we were making that move to go through and understand better how we were actually going to do it and successfully do the 1031 exchange.
Thank you for that explanation. Is this something that's mainly done for properties that you rent out, or can you do this with your primary residence?
So for your primary residence, there is an exclusion that exists when you sell your primary residence, that you don't have capital gains on. I think it's 250,000 for an individual and 500,000 for a couple. So if you have capital gains that are under those limits, and I would, verify those limits for the given year, but if you have capital gains that are under that, then you don't end up paying taxes on those anyways in the year when you sell. So there's less of a reason to do it with something like a primary rental, or a primary residence, but then like a rental property, you don't have that exclusion. So the 1031 gives you an opportunity to essentially just roll the monies into another investment, rather than have a huge chunk go to taxes.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Thank you so much for explaining that. Yeah, I was trying to trying to see if I could do that, but I knew, I was like, I bet a primary residence doesn't meet that same criteria. So, or I would have heard about this already.
Yeah, and the primary residence is actually a better deal because if you've lived in it for at least 2 of the past 5 years, you essentially have that ceiling on it where you're not going to pay the taxes anyways up to a certain limit.
Yeah, and I've heard a lot of people get their start in rental real estate by buying a primary residence and renting out part of it and living in the other part. That's why, duplexes, triplexes, quadplexes are so beneficial in this area, but you can even do it with a primary, like a single family home. And then they, rent that one out, buy another primary home, and then just like keep buying primary homes and just having like primary mortgages. I don't know how they get away with that, but I've heard people kind of do that sometimes, where they kind of do a rolling primary residence thing.
Yep.
This is
Yeah,
not
we
tax
actually
advice, no tax crimes here, please. So don't take my word for this. Consult your tax advisor.
Yeah, we actually, when we moved out of my husband's house and into the house that we currently live in, we actually had a mortgage officer tell us that we really should just, hold on to it, rent it for 3 years, and then sell it because we'd get, the gains out of it because it had been our primary residence for at least 2 of the past 5 years. But ultimately we left it as a rental just because it's a pretty good rental and we were pretty happy with it. So it kind of didn't make sense to sell at that point. But it is, it is definitely an opportunity for a lot of folks to go that route.
Yeah, for sure. And I hope this just gives some people ideas that fit within the tax law. Great. So what is your why of FI? Like, why did you want to reach financial independence, and why did you want to quit your job in 2022?
So I think my main reason for leaving my job was that I was really burning out. There's only so long you can do high stress, high impact kind of work. And when are doing that kind of work for years on end, you eventually get to a point where you feel like you've solved a lot of the problems that there were to solve, and you just keep resolving them. And so it was getting a little stale. I was getting a little burned out. And I really had other things that I wanted to chase. And I didn't feel like I had the bandwidth to do those things while I was working. I know there's a lot of folks who say that you need to retire to something and you can't just retire away from something. But I was really in a situation where I needed to get out of there to have the room in my schedule to even pursue some of the other things I wanted to do, with three small children and a full-time job that required a significant commute and a lot of overhead. I was a manager by the time I left there. I had a team of 14 people reporting to me, so I had a lot of night and weekend phone calls and texts and stuff, just in terms of making sure that things were staffed appropriately. And so being able to get out of that environment really allowed me to begin exploring some of the other things that I wanted to do. One of the main goals in my life right now is raising three good humans. And so it was feeling like it was difficult to do that when all I really had was, an hour or two with them in the evenings and then the weekends. So I'm definitely enjoying spending a lot more time with them now, and, showing them some of the ways that the world works. My husband actually took two of our boys up to like a take your kid to work day, and they got to be little scientists for a day and do a whole bunch of experiments and stuff. And those are the kinds of opportunities that we really wouldn't have had when both of us were working full time, and we had all the kids in daycare and that kind of thing. So it's made a significant difference in our quality of life. It's made a significant difference in, being able to get out and go skiing on a Tuesday, or, play a late night hockey game and not worry about getting up for work the next day, or, just be out in the garden for a significant chunk of the day and not worry about it. So all of that flexibility has definitely improved not just my quality of life, but the entire family's.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And thanks for sharing that. I completely agree with the fact that sometimes the burnout is so bad that you just need to get away from it to even have the space to understand what your why of phi would be. Because if your mind and body and soul is taken up completely by your job, you don't have time to dedicate to what you're going towards, and what you're going towards is a life without this job. And I think that's okay. I think going away from a job, especially if it's that, stressful, I think that's okay. And I think we should allow ourselves to do that. And I think having that time away can also really help you draw attention to what your values are, which will help you decide what your life after work looks like. So I completely
Yeah,
agree. Yeah.
absolutely. And I think that the other piece of that is, there are other ways to do it other than, quitting and going cold turkey like I did. Certainly some people transition into a different role or something that's less demanding, and can achieve some of the same kinds of things, and buy themselves back a little bit of that time and bandwidth, maybe in something that's not as stressful. But given what I had done for the better part of 2 decades, and just the kind of work situation I was in, starting a job hunt and finding something new didn't really appeal to me at that point. I'm not going to say I'll never go do any kind of work for pay again. But at the moment, I'm just enjoying not working and doing all of the other things that I didn't have time for.
Yeah. I feel like once I reach that point where I'm financially independent and don't have to work and I've quit my job, if I then, 10 years later, had to find another job, I would probably dig my heels in so much because I would probably not want to. Because, oh, yeah, applying for a job is a job in and of itself. So, You mentioned, doing a lot of things with your kids and your kids going and doing science experiments and you going and skiing and doing hockey games. And so that kind of leads me to like, what does the other side of Phi look like to you? What does a typical Tuesday look like? And I know you mentioned that you'd like to talk about the different seasons of your life and what each Tuesday and each season looks like. So I'd love to hear more about that.
Yeah, our lives are so variable right now. Our kids are young, and there's always some new interest or some new activity that we're getting involved in. So, in the winter, a Tuesday might see me on the ski hill with one of my little guys. My my youngest one, my 3-year-old, finally at the end of this ski season decided that he likes this whole ski idea and he doesn't just hate the boots. So we're kind of getting to the point now where that's more of an opportunity for us. And this next year, we're actually taking the big step of buying season passes for everybody in the family. Up to this point, either my husband or I has taken kind of one of the boys at a time, but we've never really been able to ski as a whole family because everybody's been at different points in their learning trajectory. And this next year is the year where we're hopefully all going to get on the hill together, which will be amazing. And then, yeah, in the spring, my oldest kiddo is in a hockey league, and then my husband and I both play. And so, any given Tuesday in the spring might see us at a rink for a practice, or it might see us shivering in the snow on the sidelines at a soccer game. So you never know. And then in the summer, we're just jumping into summer here. The boys finished school last week, and so we've been out in the garden a lot. We went to the pool actually today in the middle of the week, and there were only a few people there, so it was great. We had lots of space to ourselves to go swimming, and there's a culture pass that our library has that provides free tickets for different museums and attractions in our area. You just have to sign up, a couple weeks in advance to get the tickets. And so I try to jump on some of those, if we can get a ticket to the mining museum or to the Olympic Museum on a Tuesday or a Wednesday, we'll go do something like that. Sometimes since we're in Colorado Springs, we're only about an hour away from Denver. So sometimes we pop up there. And we can just kind of go and do the adventurous fun. I think this fall, we're probably going to try to do some longer trips with the boys. Maybe we'll even get overseas this fall. So that's kind of one of the hopes is to take opportunities for, their longer breaks when they've got, 4 or 5 day weekends from the school schedule or like a week off for spring break. Then we'll use those to actually go places and do things and spend some of our time with them in a more concentrated way. But yeah, it really just kind of depends on what's going on in the world and what the weather looks like outside. So living in Colorado, we try to get outside pretty much year round. It's just that activities vary.
Yeah, I love Colorado. I have family who live there, and I lived there myself when I was younger, and it's one of my favorite places in the country. So I'm a little jealous. I'm very curious where you're planning on going in Europe in the fall.
So my husband actually has some extended family in the United Kingdom, and so our hope is to maybe get over there. Some of his, great aunts and uncles are getting older, and we'd like to get over there before, we don't have that opportunity anymore. So everybody's, old enough now that I think we can make the flight, and COVID really put a damper in our aspirations for world travel with the boys. So, this is kind of our first opportunity to jump into that and hopefully start traveling a little bit more broadly.
That sounds really exciting. And the UK is a great starting place because, especially when you know somebody there, they speak English, and it's a great way to dip your toe in and then, go from there. And yeah, it sounds like a lot of fun. Are you ready to take control of your financial future? Do you want to learn how to set powerful goals and invest wisely? Have you been yearning to quit your 9 to 5? Then my workbook, Your Journey to Freedom, is for you. This workbook is your roadmap to financial success. Whether you're a seasoned investor or just starting out, it's designed to help you define your goals, create a plan, and take action towards building wealth. Inside, you'll find practical exercises and tools that will help you identify your short, medium, and long-term financial goals, develop a personalized investment strategy tailored to these goals and your risk tolerance, track your progress and stay accountable to your financial objectives. Plus, there's bonus content like a quiz to test what you learn and a budget worksheet. With easy-to-follow instructions and insightful prompts, this workbook will empower you to make confident decisions and stay focused on your financial journey. Don't let another day go by without taking charge of your financial life. Invest in yourself and your future with the Your Journey to Freedom workbook. Order now and start turning your dreams into reality. Visit my website at everyday-fi.com/guides to get your copy today and start your journey to financial freedom. I know we talked a lot about real estate investing, but is that your main way of reaching financial independence, or did you use stock market investing? Do you have a business? Was there some other strategy you used to gain financial independence?
So, as I kind of alluded to earlier, my husband and I have kind of always just tried to make whatever the next right decision was. And so the FI path has been a little lumpy and random. The rentals are a chunk of our FI plan, but they're not the entirety of it. We have a significant amount of funds invested in our retirement accounts. And so we'll start figuring out how we're going to draw from some of that as we move forward. Hopefully my husband will quit his employment sometime in the next year or two. He is less certain of the numbers than I am. I keep showing him my spreadsheets and he's not quite convinced. So he keeps puttering along and he enjoys what he does. And he works from home. So he's kind of got the best of both worlds there. But, we have significant retirement savings. We have the rentals. He had a business for a while. So he had the opportunity to do a lot more socking money away for retirement through his entrepreneurial efforts. And so it's kind of just a mixed bag. And, now we're kind of pulling together our taxable brokerage account, our cash, our income from the real estate, and, some of the other sources of funds that are just kind of lingering out there from our lumpy life path, and trying to smash it into something that looks like a feasible retirement plan that'll see us through to 59 and a half. We're only in our 40s now, so we've got a little bit of a runway to figure out. But, once I can convince my husband that the spreadsheets don't lie, then I think we're in a good place.
Yeah, I feel like there's always one person in the relationship who's like, look at my spreadsheet. Isn't it beautiful? And the other person's like, please get this out of my face. Would you say that your husband is, part of like the FIRE movement, or is that you? Or are you the one who's kind of driving that and he's just kind of along for the ride, or how would you describe that kind of dynamic?
Oh, he's definitely just hanging out in the back seat. And, when I tell him we're turning, he says, okay. But he is on board with it. Conceptually, he understands it. He's a computer scientist, so he's got the analytical brain. But when it comes to the engagement with the FIRE community and, trying to reach out and be more interested in some of the financial aspects of it, he's less invested in that. I keep trying to convince him to come to some of the FI activities that go on, so that maybe he'll make some friends in the FI space. But with the 3 kiddos, usually what happens is he takes care of them and I get to go do the FI stuff, and then I take care of them and he gets to do other things. So At the moment, though, it's mostly me on the FI side of the equation. But he's along with it. He understands it, and he appreciates that I'm willing to put in the effort. He just doesn't want to think about it.
Yeah, but it sounds like you have a sweet gig that you've got a built-in, babysitter for when you want to go off and do the fi life. So, I mean, I'm trying to convince my own partner to come along with me to some of these fi events, and we're not quite yet married, but he sounds very similar to yours, where he is all about, quitting the job early, but he doesn't really care about spreadsheets or the numbers. He just is like, just tell me what to save and I'll save it. And and he also does love his job. We just had a conversation this morning about it. I was like, do you want to quit? And he's like, look, I love the science, but I hate the bureaucracy of working for a corporation. And the problem is you can't separate the two. And so that's where he's kind of like warring with himself a little bit, because he doesn't want to give up being a scientist. Like, he's literally works in a lab and he loves that. And so we're kind of trying to creatively think of ways for him to, keep doing something like that, but also get out of the corporate grind.
Yeah, and that's something with my husband that we've really talked a lot about. Are there conversations that he could have with his boss about maybe adjusting his schedule, and maybe doing something that's a little bit more creatively flexible than just the 9 to 5, 40 hours a week kind of schedule, because he is remote. We've done some little mini experiments where we go, grab an Airbnb in some other part of the state for a week, and he works, during the day from that location. And so we've tried the location independent thing a little bit. But ultimately that means that the boys and I are out exploring and adventuring, and he's tied to the computer. And so we do want to find a way for him to be more involved in the adventuring part of things, and not necessarily have to be, on the clock doing programming. But the other part of it is that he really does enjoy it. Even if he wasn't coding for a paycheck, he'd probably still be writing code. So, at the end of the day, I don't expect that he'll ever, disconnect from the computer completely, but there may come a day where he's starting to write more code that's either for himself or open source, and not necessarily for the paycheck. So, it's one of those things that we've kind of set next year as an assessment point for us to figure out what that looks like going forward. But the future is flexible. I think that's one of the biggest challenges with our FI path, is that there are a lot of question marks. It's not quite as well defined as it seems like a lot of folks might be. With our kids being elementary school and preschool aged right now, I have no idea what they're going to be into when they're in middle school or high school. I have no idea what opportunities are going to come up. I have no idea what the budget looks like for all of those things. Right now, I'm just kind of assuming it's not going to be more expensive than 2 kids in daycare. And we just kind of have to take it as it comes, and keep our schedule flexible, and our plan flexible for everybody in the family, because we really don't know what the future is going to hold.
Yeah. And I think that's a really wise way to look at it, because, I've been listening to a lot of different podcasts in the community lately, where I've heard people like Brad Barrett and even Brandon from the Mad Scientist say that the numbers they had worked out for themselves, 5-10 years ago, are completely different than what they actually needed now. And luckily, everything worked out. But I think life, like you said, is lumpy and it changes. And I think your future needs to stay flexible. Also, like you said, very, very well said, by the way. And I think that people might come across as if they've got it all in hand. But I think even without kids, people's lives have to stay flexible, because something could come up. And I myself was trying to work with a money coach during Camp FI in Mid-Atlantic. And I asked him, here's kind of what we want to do. We want to have kids in the next couple of years, and we want to understand if we can, go down to part-time work. but there's all these other variables at play. And I was like, so what can we do? And he was like, there's so many variables that it's hard to know what advice to give you right now. He's like, the only thing I can tell you is increase your cash, because cash is always great to have. And that's all I can say. I was like, okay,
Yes.
well, that's not helpful. But no, it was actually, but he was like, but it's just because there's so many paths that you could go on. It's like you could quit now and have a kid now, or you could wait 5 years and have the kid then, or you could, have the kid, keep working and then quit. It's like, what path do you want to take? And there's all kinds of scenarios you can run with your numbers that fits within those. But it's like, you have to be, not to use a gross word from the computer science land, but you have to be agile. And yeah, so I completely resonate with that.
I think that's one of those things where, a lot of the voices that we hear in the FI space tend to be either a little bit more polished, or they've got a specific focus that they're trying to communicate, and so you don't hear as much about the uncertainty and the shifting, changing landscape that comes to people. And I think it's a really valid piece of the equation. Because nobody knows what the world's going to look like 20 or 50 years from now. I mean, how can you possibly plan for your entire life? And the only thing you really can do is you can, try to establish as much flexibility in your plan. Roger Whitney, the Retirement Answer Man podcast, always, talks about that agile framework and being able to pivot on things. And I really do think that there is a significant amount of value in that, because your plan today might be completely upended tomorrow, right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, just so I went to Camp FI Mid-Atlantic 2 years ago, and I did a case study. Everybody was telling me that they remembered my case study when I went there this past weekend, and I was like, I have no idea what I said. Can you remind me? Because my life now is so different than it was back then. Like I, bought a house, I moved in with my partner, and I've had, I think, 4 jobs, seriously, 4 jobs since that weekend. And just, your life just kind of can explode sometimes, and for the good and for the bad. And yeah, you just, like you said, you have to keep flexible and you have to keep agile. I think that's kind of the key to life. And I personally love that. I don't like things to stay the same. I, derive energy from things changing up, but some people might find that a little bit anxiety ridden, and understandably so. And so having a plan, for every outcome would probably be best for those folks. But a sense of, understanding that everything can change definitely needs to be there. Okay, so let's switch to the topic of which FI path you're targeting. So I know you said whenever you kind of went down your path, some of the ones like Fat FI, Barista FI, Coast FI didn't really exist. And so what would you call your flavor of financial independence?
I feel like we're just kind of middle of the road FI, or maybe it's more like family FI. I think that's an aspect of the community that doesn't get talked about as much. The FI with kids is just its own thing. My husband and I did not have kids for a significant chunk of our time together. Like I said, we've been together almost 20 years, and our oldest is 8. So, we were kind of just rolling along with the 4% rule as a guiding light for a while there. And with kids, it's just a giant question mark. I have no idea what things are going to cost or what we're going to decide to spend money on. I have no idea, where opportunities may take us. And so I'm really just, we've kind of aimed for the 4% rule ish. But I just kind of go into it with an expectation that our plan is going to change, and we'll just have to adjust with it.
Yeah, that makes sense. I like the middle of the road or FI with kids. I think that's a great one. And you're not the first person to tell me that a lot of the podcasts don't really seem to mention kids, which is funny because most people a lot of the people who get interviewed do have kids, but it's not something that they bring up as part of their story. So I'd love to bring on more people like you who have kids to talk about, the messiness that comes with FI and kids. And I really like the FI with kids. I think we should add that to the financial independence vernacular for sure.
Yeah. Well, and I think, kids don't have to be expensive. There's a lot of mythology out there about how expensive, everything has to be with kids. And it doesn't have to be that way. But you do have to have those value conversations with your kids. And you do have to be deliberate about what it is you're going to spend money on. Because otherwise it can totally eat your lunch. And there are so many expenses that can potentially come up. And it takes a level of cognizance and a level of deliberateness in your plan to make sure that you're not just going to completely blow the budget because, somebody wants to play hockey and it's going to be thousands of dollars, right? And we've actually already started having some of those conversations with our kids. My oldest is getting to the point where a lot of the sports that he plays, they're trying to encourage him to do travel, sports. And we're not ready for that as a family. And we're also not ready for that financial commitment. And so we've had that conversation with him and we've kind of talked about it. But he's part of that decision too. If he was really all in on one sport, we might reassess. But at the moment, he just enjoys playing different sports. And, the fact that this, has a 6-week season and this has an 8-week season and that has a 6-month season, he doesn't really care as long as, he gets to do a few different things and he gets to be on a team and compete. So, there's definitely some of those conversations that have to happen, but I think, having everybody on the same page makes a difference in how much chaos and variability there can be in your budget. But you just never know. Our kids are spending significant amounts of money and time doing sports now that they weren't a few years ago when they were significantly smaller. So, only time will tell how things will change.
Yeah, for sure. And I feel like you're approaching it in a really smart way by kind of including him in these conversations. So you're teaching him about, like, okay, we understand this is important to you, but we also know that there's a lot of other things that are important to you. So here's how to balance these things. And you're teaching him that kind of skill and that kind of value balancing early. And, I feel like I don't have kids, but I feel like if my kid was older and like hockey was the only thing he was ever doing and he could potentially be scouted by a college and, doing the travel stuff would help with that, then sure. Yeah. I would pay for that if he wasn't doing anything else. But that's different than you said he's 8, right? And doing a bunch of other things. Like that's a different, you don't want to deprive them, but you also need to balance it with what you can afford and what makes sense. And so I think you're doing that incredibly well and incredibly smart. So nice one.
Thank you.
I think everybody can learn from you. I'm learning from you. Let's talk about any current struggles that you might have right now. And it doesn't have to be necessarily FI related, but anything that is coming up for you that you'd like to talk about.
So I think the biggest challenge that I have had since I quit my job almost 2.5 years ago now was initially I really stressed out about I was a female lead in a male dominated field, and I really felt like I was stepping away from that was disappointing the women who were coming up behind me. I was leaving a void in leadership and mentorship that wasn't necessarily going to be filled quickly or easily. And my husband actually kind of got my head straight on it a little bit by pointing out that, yeah, I wasn't there in the office with them anymore, but they had seen me step away from my career and retire in my 40s. And so there was something to strive for there as well. And one of the ways that I have filled that gap in kind of that mentorship and leadership role is that I've started teaching junior achievement financial literacy courses. And so I've been going into middle schools and actually teaching financial concepts to sixth graders, which has been a lot of fun and still provides me with an opportunity to, be in that mentoring role and share information with others who are coming up. And, it's a different way than I was doing it before, but I've really enjoyed that. And I think, as I continue to progress along my FI path, I'll probably find other ways to give back and other ways to, fill that leadership and mentorship piece that I really enjoyed about my prior role. I haven't necessarily figured it all out yet. So I think the junior achievement is one piece of it, but there's probably other ones that I don't even know about yet. And I'm just kind of open to those opportunities. When I quit my job, I had a list of like 14 different volunteering and outreach kind of things that I wanted to get involved in, or I wanted to pursue, or, I wanted to get engaged with. And after a year, I erased the board because I hadn't done any of them. And now I'm kind of adding things in organically as they come to me, and I'm letting life, kind of to lead the way a little bit rather than trying to force it. But it's a struggle to go from, being that type A on all the time manager to just having this role that I have now in, my own FI journey and, more of a family centric and community centric approach to things as opposed to the work centric approach. It's a struggle that I'll continue to work my way through, but, as those opportunities come up, then I know a little bit more what I'm looking for now than I did, even a year ago.
Yeah, I completely understand that feeling of being somebody who could be that representation for somebody else and walking away from that. I often feel like, if I wanted to keep going in the corporate world, I could potentially become like a VP level or president level. At least that's what I've been told by some of my mentors. And when I think about that, I shudder. I'm like, oh God, no, I would never want to do that. I don't want that kind of responsibility. But when I look at the top, I see very few people like me, meaning women, there. And so I'm like, okay, do I have a responsibility to that representation, or do I have a responsibility to myself and my values? And like female representation is one of my values. So I completely get that, because it's almost like a war of the values and like what can you actually balance? But I think being a female lead in your community does the same thing. And I also think that, at least from my side, me starting a business is showing up as still a female lead, just in a smaller capacity. And I think, taking care of yourself and demonstrating that self-care for others when we're in a world that, puts a lot of value on productivity and how many things you have going on, I think is also incredibly valuable. So I think you're going to make huge strides with what you're doing. And I think you're going to, have an impact on those that you're working with. And, it might not be the people that were at your job, but it'll be new people and people in your community. And so, but I feel you on that. It's a struggle I have myself. So, is there any support that the community can provide for you? I think you mentioned that you would like to help others, but is there anything that the community can do for you, or vice versa?
So I am always looking for opportunities to provide help and assistance. I have a significant amount of science and math and personnel management background, project management kind of stuff as well. And I would love to find those opportunities that need my help. And so that is one of those things that I've not necessarily had as much opportunity to do as I'd like to over the past couple of years. The boys take up a lot of my time, but I would ask, the community if there's anything that, they feel that I resonate with in something that they're doing. I would love to help.
I actually am creating posts on my website that I'll link in the show notes for each and every one of these episodes. and they have a comment section. So if anybody has any opportunities that Erin can get involved with, yeah, link them there. And Erin, I'll make sure to, I mean, you'll see it in the show notes for your page, but make sure to check back there to see. But if you're also active in all of the Facebook groups, would that be like the Choose 5 Facebook groups? Like which ones are you in so that people know where to reach you?
Yeah, so I'm actually active in the Choose 5 Facebook group. I'm also the admin for the Colorado Springs local Choose FI group. And then I tend to lurk on some of the other ones as well, catching up to FI with Becky Hepdig, or previously Becky Hepdig, and Bill Yant, and Jackie Kaminskoski. I tend to hang out on that page a little bit. I really like some of the stuff that they're doing. And then, some of the Bigger Pockets money and some of those other ones. You'll find me there every once in a while too. I am trying to get out more and meet folks in person. But I'm an introvert at heart. So sometimes it's a bit challenging to leave the house. So, but I'm definitely lurking on the Facebook pages.
I am with you. I am also an introvert. Great. So that's great that people can reach out to you that way. But again, if anybody wants to leave a comment, you can on the podcast episode page. The last question I have for you is I can give you one way to give back to the community right now is giving us a life hack recommendation or learning.
Yeah. So I think the life hack that I would offer up to everybody is to look for the free and inexpensive activities in your own backyard. We tend to use our public library a lot. It's a really great resource. But there's also, a ton of stuff that you can find on Eventbrite, or there's one that we use called Macaroni Kid. There's so many things to do. I just this week signed my boys and I up for like a Zumba in the park thing for all ages. So we're just going to go dance in the park for an hour. Stuff like that, where it's just fun and it gets us out of the house and it gets us engaging with other people in our community. And that can really be a great outlet for finding your local tribe. As I mentioned, I do hang out on the Facebook and internet forum kind of stuff a lot. But in the interest of getting out and being social and finding, local friends, I think there's nothing that beats, using some of those free and inexpensive community activities to get out and, experience the things in your area.
Yeah, I second that. There's so much you can do in your own backyard, literally and figuratively, that, you don't have to spend a lot of money to have a good time, I feel like. And actually, I had a question earlier, but I wanted to wait till this moment. You mentioned that kids don't have to be expensive, and I wondered if you had any like recommendations or hacks that you found to make having kids a little bit less daunting financially, because somebody like me who I've been putting off having kids for a while, I'm 37, because of the expense. I mean, childcare where I live is going to be about $2,500 a month per child, which to me is like, oh my God. So I'm wondering if you have any like recommendations or learnings or hacks that you've learned for making kids a little less expensive.
So I hear you on the childcare. My little guys go, they only go part-time to daycare. And since I am home, it doesn't make sense to send them all time. But we still spend $2,000 a month just for part-time care for the two of them. That being said, when they're home, and that's a decision that we've made specifically so that they'll have time and opportunity to play with other kids their age, and to give me a little bit of time where I'm not going crazy chasing toddlers around all day. But when they're home, we play in the backyard. We have a huge garden. Garden's not very expensive, but they will spend hours digging in the dirt and planting seeds and checking on their seedlings and watering the seedlings. There's a lot of opportunity just in our yard. And then, we go for family bike rides, and we go down to the park and play soccer, or we, use as I mentioned, the culture pass that's available through our library. And we'll get free tickets to the Nature and Science Museum, or, some of the other attractions that are in the Colorado Springs area. The nice part about being here is that we've got a lot of free city parks and hiking trails and stuff like that. So, if we're going out to do something, it doesn't have to be, the earth-shattering, expensive stuff. There was one day last summer where we went over to a small town that's just west of here that has an old school penny arcade. And we just played at the arcade for like 2 hours. And so it was a little bit of a drive over there. And so we called it an adventure, and we went over there and we played at the arcade for 2 hours, and it didn't cost us very much because the machines mostly take quarters. And it was a great outing, and it wasn't that expensive. And so I think there's a lot of opportunity to really just look for the things that interest them and then follow those. And you can do those in, not necessarily a break the bank kind of way. There's always an opportunity to spend a ton of money to do those things. But there's usually a free or inexpensive alternative that's just as rewarding for them, because the world is so new and interesting when you're little. And it doesn't have to be, outlaying hundreds of dollars. And actually, I would say that sometimes spending the hundreds of dollars is not a great idea when they're little. Maybe when we're teenagers, they're teenagers, we'll be doing more of that. But right now, I could spend $400 to take everybody to an Avalanche hockey game, but somebody's going to melt down halfway through the second period, and we're going to end up leaving because it'll be late, and, the food is expensive, and it's just going to be a stressful environment. And we're better off, going and watching a high school hockey game down the street or something like that. So I think there are ways to just get similar experiences in a way that's going to resonate with your kids. And it doesn't have to be, hundreds of dollars to do it.
Yeah, and that's the power of this community, right? We think differently. And I love the suggestion of, instead of going to a pro game, going to a high school game, because for your kids, those, big kids probably seem like the pros, right? Because they're, the big kids. And that's such a great, idea. And I hope somebody heard that out there and is like, ooh, I'm going to do that. And what you said makes me think of, when parents buy really expensive toys that come in huge boxes, and then the kid could care less about the toy and wants to play in the box. Like, you really don't need a lot. Yeah. I mean, you could make forts out of old, boxes that you go and get from like Sears. Okay. Wait, yes. Sears isn't around anymore. Whatever department store is around. The big, huge refrigerator boxes, you can make fun little forts out of that in your living room and stuff. And I feel like I'm very excited to have kids, because I feel like I'm going to be able to kind of be a child again with them. Like you said, the world is new to them, and you can live vicariously through them. I actually told my partner last night that I was like, man, I wish we could raise our kids in the 90s like we were raised, away from technology, digging in the dirt, like you said, with your kids, going to the creek.
Yes. Well, and the other thing that I will say, and this might be more in the life hack category, but my kids love the secondhand sales that they have a couple of times a year. So there's two brands that we have here locally, and I think they're national brands. One is Just Between Friends, and the other one is Raylana. And they're secondhand sales, which is great, because then I can get a whole bunch of kids' clothing for not very expensive, and they're constantly blowing out the knees on their pants. So it works out for me. But the second upside of going to those sales is that my boys' allowance goes a lot further if they buy something there than it would if I take them to Target or Walmart. And they feel good because they're keeping something out of a landfill that somebody else didn't want to play with anymore. And they actually are able to buy things that they wouldn't be able to afford if they were trying to buy it new. And so it's an opportunity for us to have a conversation about the value of their dollar and about them making the decisions of how they want to spend their money in a way that's it's a little bit more limited because it's whatever's at the sale, and sometimes they go into it saying they're looking for a specific thing. And when they don't find that thing, then we just have a discussion about it and move on. But it also means that they're able to appreciate that things don't have to be, expensive, and that there are alternative ways of doing those things. And they're always really excited to go, because they know they're actually going to be able to afford to get some stuff that, they might not be able to afford otherwise.
Yeah, that's a great idea. It also reminds me of when I was a kid, we used to go to garage sales and we had such a good time finding toys at garage sales because we
Yes.
would be able to see things that like sometimes we'd never seen before because they were old toys, and had a really good time with that. So yeah, I think that's an awesome suggestion. Is there anything you'd like to talk about that we haven't touched on yet?
I don't think so. I think this was a wonderful conversation, and I just hope that this will help some folks think a little bit about their path, and keep in mind that life's lumpy, and you're never going to be able to plan it all out. So you might as well just kind of keep going in the right direction, and you'll eventually end up where you want to be. But I think as long as you're directionally accurate, everything else sorts itself out.
I absolutely agree. And I like what you said earlier about letting life lead the way. Thank you so much for being here, Erin. This was full of gems for parents and future parents and anybody on the 5 path. So thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Everyday 5 podcast. If you're loving the show, here are some things you can do. Number 1, subscribe in your favorite podcast player and share the show with your friends and family. Number 2, please leave a review. I'm always looking for ways to improve the show. Number 3, check out my website, everyday-fi.com, where you can listen to all the episodes and leave comments for myself and the guest. Number 4, if you're interested in sharing your own financial independence story, you can find a submission form at everyday-fi.com/podcast. And finally, number 5, join my Patreon membership for only $5 a month at patreon.com/everyday5podcast. This is a one-woman show, so every little bit counts. See you next time as we continue to go down the path to financial freedom.